Hey folks, I wanted to do a quick video, probably less than 10 minutes, about really note taking in my class. A lot of this will apply to your other classes, but some of this stuff is very specific to my class. Big thing with note taking really on any class is that you're taking down a ton of information throughout the semester, and you really have a limited ability to store that in your brain. You can't remember all of the information that we're throwing out. And this is just for my class. You've got several other classes on top of that. So you really need to take notes and take notes well. And I think a lot of people, not a lot of people, but some people come in and they don't really have a solid background in that. And that's kind of why I'm doing this. Um, in my class, you can take notes by hand, you can take notes on a laptop. I'm okay, honestly, with recording lectures. That can be a little bit of a trap if you record lectures, if you just kind of sit there and allow the recording to do all of it for you. That's probably not a good idea because, you're most likely before each test, you're not going to sit there and listen to 10 lectures the night before and retain anything. So if you do take notes, record, that's totally cool, but definitely take notes as well. Personally, for me, I'm a lot faster with a pen and paper than I am with a laptop. I think with a laptop, I tend to try to type out everything that's going on. With a pen and paper, and with a laptop even, I know that I am not fast enough. Nobody's fast enough to write down everything your instructor says. And so with a pen and paper, I think something in my head sort of realizes I have to summarize, and you do. You can't most likely write down everything that any of your instructors say. You've got to summarize that stuff on the fly, as well as figure out ways to take notes a little bit faster through some various tricks and stuff. So some of this is going to be about some of those little tricks and things, and other parts of this talk here are about picking up on the really important stuff for my class. Other instructors will have different ways to tell what's important for their class. So kind of the big thing to sort of speed things up is to use a lot of abbreviations. For me, we talk about a lot of government issues and governmental terms in my class. And if you physically wrote out Reconstruction, or you physically wrote out constitutional or unconstitutional every time, that's a long word. And so if you just abbreviate that, Reconstruction, I just write out recon, RECON. Constitutional is CON. Unconstitutional is UNCON. I mentioned the Supreme Court quite a lot in both sides of U.S. history. That's SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS. Little tricks like that you can shorten it enough to still know what it means. Like you wouldn't want to abbreviate Reconstruction just with an R. I don't know, what are you talking about there? So, shorten it up enough to where you know what it means, but you still, can shave some seconds off of each word. I have no idea how this works, but my wife, when she takes notes, she leaves out all the vowels. My brain can't do that, but hers can. She's super smart, but I don't know how that works for her. But that's a method that she's developed, that she can shave seconds off of each word, and that adds up. It allows her to get more things down. So those are some tricks that you can use in high school. My history teacher in high school, he used a lot of shorthand sort of things that, like symbols for over and symbols for between. I did that for his class, but it just never really stuck with me. I don't think it just, so you've got to find something that works for you. That shorthand stuff probably worked for him, but for me, it doesn't really work. So those are some, abbreviations will shave off some seconds here and there, and that's important. All those seconds add up when you're trying to get stuff down. The biggest thing for my class runs on sort of a narrative. It's a big giant story, and that's what I do. I stand up there and tell you guys stories, and it's a lot of fun. Uh, so, the biggest thing for my class is that you can probably, and it takes a little while to figure out, but you can leave out the less important details. Um, some stuff, it's something to move the story along or something to make the story more interesting, but it's not really an essential part of the thing. Later in the semester, depending on which class you're in, I'll tell you a story about a guy that has an affair with a United States senator's wife. And every time he goes over to their house, he parades up and down the street, he waves a handkerchief to signal that he's available. Um, Now, for our purposes, him waving the handkerchief out in front of the house isn't important. It doesn't matter how he gets this woman's attention. What matters is that they do have this affair, and it has some legal ramifications later on. Those are the important things. So those little details, the waving the handkerchief, stuff like that's not really that significant. That's not something that you would need to get down. But the affair and the political and especially the legal ramifications, those are serious deals. Um, some other details are important though. You know, at one point early in the semester, you're in my U.S. History 1 class, we talk about an event in Jamestown Colony in 1609, and a lot of people starved to death. About 500 out of the 600 colonials that are there starved to death. A detail that's important there is what kicks this whole thing off. What's the misstep that gets this whole thing going, and most of the colonials there at Jamestown die. Um, a smaller thing that will probably stick with you because it's strange, but it's not really that important, but it keeps the story interesting. A smaller thing that is in there is that during that time, during that event, this mass casualty event, there were 3 people that were executed for doing things that made the situation worse. It's already not bad enough. They make it worse. And I'll talk about what these, 3 different individuals do to make things even worse. Well, that's interesting. You'll probably remember it just because, we are a weird kind of species that finds those morbid things interesting. That's just what we do. But that's not really the important. The important thing is what happened to get us started down this mass casualty event. And so as you're taking notes, these 3 people that make things worse, not really so super interesting in that aspect. Um, Now another thing that I really like to talk about in my history classes, that if you hear me say something about a myth, your ears should perk up, because I really enjoy talking about sort of these myths that we create with history, that we sort of have this idea that this event happened in a certain way, and we've kind of popularized that. It really didn't. So if I say something about there's this myth about this, you should pay attention about what the myth is, and how it actually does play out. Great example, a couple of them I'll give to you to get them in your head, I guess. Powhatan. There's this idea that we have that, during the early colonization of Jamestown, Powhatan captures John Smith and almost executes John Smith, and Pocahontas rushes in and she saves Smith's life. Didn't really happen that way. Probably John Smith actually created that myth, and it very likely had other meaning behind it at the time. So those myths are really interesting. Big one that is especially prevalent around here that we talk about in class is this idea that Southerners have, some Southerners, not a lot anymore, thankfully, but a lot of Southerners have this idea that the Civil War was fought over states' rights. Well, no, not at all. Uh, the myth there is that the United Daughters of the Confederacy, following the war, after the war was over by a decade, they come in and replace that, a lot of the ideas that the war absolutely was fought over slavery, and we have mountains and mountains of evidence. If you want to get how really solid this is, the governor of Alabama in 1860 makes a proclamation about these are all the things that the Lincoln administration is going to do after he comes into office, after he's sworn in. And not a single one of them states' rights. They are all hammering on slavery and the possibilities there of what might happen. But your uncle's cousin's nephew on Facebook is like, it's states' rights. No, it's not. But we'll delve into that stuff and those kind of historical sort of arguments, I guess. Those kind of things. If it's a myth or something like that, I mentioned. If it's a big turning point, so myths and stuff like that. Turning points are another huge thing with me. Now, these are big issues with most historians, honestly, that an event happens and we do stuff differently on a large scale. During the first half of U.S. history, we have several rebellions that change issues of slavery. There's other rebellions that change issues of the authority of the United States government, as well as sometimes the scale of the United States government. Well, those are big events. You should know, what does Bacon's Rebellion, what happens after Bacon's Rebellion? What happens after Shays' Rebellion later on? What are some major results of those things? Because it's a massive switch in American history. Another sort of big thing, and there's some of this in the first half of U.S. history that I talk about, but a lot more in the second half, but both sides of it. Important Supreme Court cases. I really like a lot of legal history. I originally intended to go to law school, and so I think I just sort of, that's a little bit in my head, even though I'm not at all. Probably would not be a good lawyer in the slightest. But I like a lot of legal history. And so Supreme Court cases are big things. And especially, landmark cases. We talk about a lot of big, significant cases that change the way, that the American people view the government, the way the government functions, the way the court itself functions. Race relations, racial issues, stuff like that. Supreme Court cases are huge things. The ones that I talk about, I don't talk about the small scale, ones. Some of them are interesting and weird, but we don't really have time. But those turning points, those dramatic things. Brown versus Board, 1954, that starts us on the road to desegregating schools. These are big monster events. And so you really, for those, you should remember, note down the background of the case. What's the argument? What's the problem? And then how the court decides. So, for Brown versus Board, for example, it's the schools are segregated. Some parents take that argument to court that this is not an equal education. And so, that's sort of the background there. The court then decides that, hey, this isn't, in fact, an equal education based on the 14th Amendment. And then, the results of that. You don't really need to get some of the details down. A great example that I talk about in class is Scott versus Sanford. The case of Dred Scott. He's an enslaved man. He's taken by his owner into free territory. and the court has to decide, because he files a freedom suit, whether he's free because he went into a free territory. Well, some of the background on that is that Dred Scott and one of his owners lived here in Huntsville. Well, I bring that into the class because it's interesting, it's local to us, but it doesn't really have a whole big deal to bear on the case. So little details like that you can kind of overlook. You're getting at the big significant portions of things in your notes. Now that doesn't mean, after I've gone through all this, it doesn't mean like, oh, I don't have to take a lot of, you're going to take a lot of notes, but I'm trying to help you to sort of weed out stuff that you don't quite need. Finally, and I've gone over 10 minutes and I apologize, but you're getting a lot of information here. Finally, think of, for all your classes, think of taking notes like you're playing poker. You're looking for my tells. When you're playing poker, you're trying to guess based on your opponent's reactions. Do they have a good hand? Do they have a bad hand? You're looking for evidence coming from me. Is this going to be on the test or not? And I'm thankfully, for you guys, really bad at playing poker. Especially in the early part of the semester. I'll do this more, but I'll tell you, this is really important. You should underline that. If I say something like that, it's got pretty good odds it's going to be on the test. Sometimes I'll tell you, circle this, put stars next to it, because I really want to emphasize how important it is. I'll do this more in the beginning of the class. I think probably toward the end, I might not do it as much because I don't do it on purpose, but I sort of feel like that you guys are kind of getting to know what sort of information I ask for on the test. And so you're getting better at taking notes in my class. So I probably don't do that as much toward the end of the semester as I did in the beginning, but I'm trying to kind of get you to have sort of more of a feel for the information that I find important. Anyway, I'm going to cut there and be done. But if you have any questions on this video, bring them up to me in class. I'll be happy to help. But this is a good measure of stuff that, especially for my class, but also can translate into your other stuff. So thanks, and we'll see you in class.